Every day, thousands of container ships cross the oceans, carrying the backbone of the global economy. Food, energy, electronics, almost everything moves through ports. And quietly, China has been buying influence over them. Over the past 2 decades, Chinese companies have invested in nearly 130 ports worldwide, spending more than $60 billion. These are not military bases. They are commercial ports, places meant to move goods, not project power. And that is exactly why the United States is worried. Because ports don't just handle trade. They sit at choke points of global supply chains. They collect data. They shape who moves, how fast, and at what cost. So, when a strategic rival controls so many of them, the question is no longer just economic, it's geopolitical. To understand why ports have become a geopolitical concern, we first need to understand how the global economy actually moves. Roughly 80% of all global trade travels by sea. Not by air, not by land, by ships. Every smartphone, every barrel of oil, every bag of grain depends on a system that most of us never see. And ports are the critical junctions of that system, the places where global trade physically enters and exits nations. Without ports, global commerce doesn't slow down, it stops. This is what makes maritime trade fundamentally different from roads or railways. If a highway is blocked, traffic can often be rerouted. If a port is disrupted, there are very few alternatives. Geography doesn't offer detours at sea. China understands this reality better than almost anyone. Today, 6 of the 10 busiest ports in the world are located in China. And for China's own economy, the dependence is even deeper. About 95% of its trade moves by sea. As the world's largest exporter of manufactured goods, China's prosperity relies on the constant, uninterrupted movement of cargo. Raw materials coming in, finished products going out. That means access is everything. Not just access to markets, but access to the infrastructure that connects those markets. Ports are not optional assets for China. They are essential. And this is where ports stop being just economic facilities and start becoming strategic ones. Because ports sit at the intersection of supply chains, finance, and logistics. They determine which ships dock first, how fast goods move, what data gets collected. And in moments of crisis, wars, sanctions, trade disputes, which flows continue and which ones don't. Control over ports doesn't need to be dramatic to be powerful. It doesn't require blockades or battleships. Often it works quietly through priorities, delays, fees, and access. That's why, in a world where trade has become increasingly politicized, ports are no longer neutral ground. They are pressure points. And once you see ports that way, China's global port strategy starts to look less like routine investment and more like a long-term play for leverage. China's global port expansion is not a collection of isolated deals. It follows a framework, one Beijing officially calls the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. On the surface, BRI looks like a development program. Launched in 2013, it promises to improve global connectivity by building roads, railways, bridges, pipelines, and ports across Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. The language is technical. The framing is economic. The message is cooperation. But infrastructure is never neutral. Infrastructure decides how economies connect, who depends on whom, and which routes become essential, and which ones fade away. Within this framework, ports are not just another category of projects. They are the centerpiece. Ports are where land-based economies meet the global system. They are the gateways through which raw materials enter and finished goods leave. Unlike highways or railways, a port doesn't just connect 2 places. It connects entire regions to the world. For China, this matters enormously. As the world's largest exporter, and one of its largest importers of energy, food, and industrial inputs, China's economy depends on uninterrupted maritime access. Any disruption at sea, whether from conflict, sanctions, or political pressure, carries real risk. That is why ports occupy a central position in China's global strategy. Over the past decade, Chinese companies have invested in port projects across both hemispheres, from Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean to Africa, Europe, and South America. These investments go beyond concrete and cranes. They often include long-term operating rights, logistics platforms, digital port systems, and integration with Chinese shipping networks. Taken together, the scale is unprecedented. Chinese entities have invested in around 129 port projects worldwide, with total commitments exceeding $60 billion. No other country has built a comparable maritime footprint, not in scope, not in coordination, and not within such a short time frame. This matters because ports do not function in isolation. They shape shipping routes. They influence logistics decisions. Over time, trade reorganizes itself around the infrastructure that works most smoothly. And once supply chains lock into those routes, reversing them becomes difficult, expensive, and politically risky. Seen this way, the Belt and Road Initiative is less about individual projects and more about building a system, one that quietly reshapes how global trade flows and who sits at the center of it. From that perspective, China's ports are not just investments seeking returns. They are anchors, designed to hold influence in place for decades. At this point, it's tempting to assume that China simply owns these ports outright. The reality, however, is more layered and far more subtle. Not every port built with Chinese involvement falls under full Chinese control. Instead, China's global port footprint is organized through multiple ownership structures, each designed to produce a different degree of influence rather than absolute authority. The most common arrangement is joint ventures with host governments or multinational partners. In these cases, the land usually remains under national ownership, preserving formal sovereignty. Chinese firms finance construction, provide technical expertise, and often take on long-term operational roles. The result is a balance that appears neutral on paper, while still granting China sustained access and influence over daily operations. And a second, more sensitive category includes ports where Chinese companies hold majority ownership. There are roughly 17 such ports worldwide. These assets offer greater leverage, not through dramatic actions, but through routine decisions. Which ships are prioritized, how capacity is allocated, and how infrastructure evolves over time, even while remaining officially commercial. A third layer involves Chinese private companies, operating terminals or logistics hubs within global supply chains. These investments often appear market-driven, but they remain connected to a broader Chinese ecosystem of shipping lines, financing, insurance, and trade policy. Which leads to a critical question. Who is actually exercising influence? China's port strategy is carried out by a blend of state-owned giants such as COSCO and China Merchants, all private firms and local partnerships. The boundaries between these actors are often indistinct. State-owned enterprises pursue profits while aligning with national priorities. Private firms operate in markets shaped by state policy and supported by state-backed capital. To see how this strategy plays out in the real world, look at Chancay, a massive new deep-water port being built just north of Lima, Peru. Designed to handle the largest container ships, Chancay is expected to become a major export hub for South America, moving agricultural products, minerals, and raw materials directly across the Pacific. Its location matters. From Chancay, ships can sail straight to major Chinese ports, cutting transit times, reducing costs, and reshaping regional trade routes. For Peru, the logic is simple. China is already its largest trading partner. A significant share of Peruvian exports now go to China, a pattern mirrored across South America, including Brazil and Chile. Peru needs modern infrastructure to compete. China was willing to finance and build it. The United States was not. And from Washington's perspective, that is exactly the problem. Because Chancay is not just an economic project, it sits in a region where trade, influence, and security increasingly overlap. U.S. officials have warned that such ports could become dual-use assets, commercial in peacetime, strategic in moments of crisis. A deep-water port capable of handling massive cargo ships can also support refueling, logistics, and naval operations if geopolitical tensions rise. Peru and China strongly deny any military intent. But the concern isn't about what Chansay is today. It's about what it could become tomorrow. And that uncertainty is what turns a port into a strategic question. The core concern for the United States is not that China's ports are military bases today. It's that many of them are built in ways that make military use possible tomorrow. Modern ports are inherently dual-use infrastructure. The same features that support commercial shipping, deep water access, heavy cranes, fuel storage, logistics facilities, can also support naval operations. Container ships, supply vessels, and warships often rely on the same basic infrastructure. This is not a theoretical concern. There is precedent. In Djibouti, China initially invested in a commercial port. Over time, that presence expanded. What began as an economic project eventually became China's first official overseas military base, positioned near one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The shift was gradual, not sudden, shaped by access, old logistics, and geography. That experience has changed how U.S. intelligence views China's port investments today. Recent assessments suggest Beijing is exploring additional overseas locations for future military access, particularly in Southeast Asia and across the Indian Ocean. Ports in countries such as Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Kenya, all located near critical maritime routes, are increasingly seen as potential logistics hubs. Even if they remain commercially operated, the issue is not stated intentions. It is capability. A port that can service massive cargo ships can, under different conditions, refuel naval vessels, support resupply missions, or host military logistics. In moments of crisis, access often matters more than ownership. There is also a less visible concern: data. All ports generate real-time information about shipping schedules, cargo volumes, and supply chain bottlenecks. In an era where economic intelligence is strategically valuable, this data reveals how economies function and where they are vulnerable. In modern competition, power is not only about weapons. It is about information, access, and readiness. That is why ports are no longer seen as neutral economic assets. They are strategic infrastructure. If there is one place where these concerns become concrete, it is the Panama Canal. This narrow passage handles around 5% of global trade every year. For the United States, the dependency is far greater. Roughly 40% of U.S. container traffic moves through the canal, making it one of the most critical arteries in the American economy. There is no practical substitute. Any disruption immediately translates into higher costs, longer transit times, and supply chain stress. That is why control around the canal is treated as a strategic issue. The ports at both ends of the Panama Canal are operated by C.K. Hutchison, a Hong Kong-based conglomerate with deep ties to global shipping. Formally, these are commercial concessions, and Panama retains full sovereignty over the canal itself. Beijing does not own the canal, nor does it officially control Hutchison. But for U.S. policymakers, ownership is not the central question. Influence does not require shutting the canal down. In modern trade conflicts, leverage often appears in quieter forms: docking priorities, inspection procedures, administrative delays, or adjustments to port fees. Individually, these actions look technical. Collectively, they can shape trade flows at scale. What unsettles Washington is the perceived closeness between major Chinese-linked corporations and the Chinese state, and the risk that commercial decisions could align with geopolitical pressure during a crisis. These concerns are no longer hypothetical. In 2025, Panama began reassessing and renegotiating port arrangements amid growing international attention. At the same time, governments across Europe and North America tightened screening mechanisms for foreign investment in strategic infrastructure, explicitly citing ports and logistics hubs. The signal is unmistakable. Ports are no longer treated as neutral by default. They are increasingly viewed as instruments of economic power. And in this new landscape, the Panama Canal is not just a shortcut between oceans. It is a pressure point in global competition. The United States is not alone in rethinking China's expanding role in global infrastructure. Across the world, governments are reaching similar conclusions, even if their responses look very different on the surface. In Europe, the reaction has taken a legal and regulatory form. Over the past several years, the European Union has strengthened its investment screening mechanisms, with a clear focus on strategic infrastructure such as ports, energy networks, and telecommunications. These rules do not amount to an outright ban on Chinese investment. Instead, they give national governments the power to intervene when ownership or control is seen as a security risk, making it far more difficult for foreign investors to acquire decisive stakes in critical assets. This signals a deeper shift in how infrastructure is understood. It is no longer seen as a neutral platform for commerce, but as something that can shape power relationships over time. In the United States and among its allies, the response has been more practical than legal. Authorities have expanded security audits and operational reviews at major ports, while at the same time trying to create alternatives to Chinese financing. Development banks, export credit agencies, and new competitive infrastructure funds are designed to offer countries other options, particularly in regions where access and logistics have strategic importance. Yet this approach runs into hard limits. For many developing countries, the primary concern is not geopolitical alignment, but economic survival and growth. Ports, roads, and logistics systems are not abstract strategic debates. They are the foundations of trade, or jobs, and state revenue. And in many cases, China remains the only actor willing and able to deliver large-scale infrastructure quickly, at scale, and with fewer political conditions attached. That reality creates a difficult trade-off. Governments are forced to balance long-term strategic exposure against immediate development needs. Rejecting Chinese investment can mean postponing or completely losing infrastructure projects that their economies depend on. This is the central paradox shaping the global response today. The world may be increasingly cautious about China's influence, but it remains deeply reliant on the infrastructure China helps build. Managing that contradiction without fragmenting the global economy may become one of the defining challenges of the decades ahead. China's global port network is many things at once. It is an economic achievement, a strategic instrument, and a source of leverage in an increasingly competitive world. The question now is not whether ports matter, they clearly do. It's whether these ports can ever remain truly neutral, or whether they are becoming the new checkpoints of global power. And in that quiet race for control, who ultimately pays the price?